Okay, so I make it out to be past, so let's make a start. Hi everyone, my name's Jessica Steele. I'm a Director of Business Development for Grayble in the EMEA region. And on behalf of Grayble Companies, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is on measuring the value of talent mobility. So before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping points. So firstly, all participants have been put on mute, and that's so that we can ensure a better listening experience for everybody. Secondly, this session is being recorded, and in a few days' time, you'll be sent a link and a presentation deck as well. And then finally, we'll conclude today with a Q&A session. So you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a Q&A box. So at any point, please put your questions in there, and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end of the session. But any that we can't get through, we'll follow up directly with you. So a little bit about our presenter. So I'm joined today by Beverly King, a Director for Client Development and Consulting for Grayble, also in the EMEA region. And prior to joining Grayble, Beverly has over 15 years worth of in-house experience in HR and reward and mobility. And that's across a variety of industries, including defence and aerospace, electronics, and also financial services. And Beverly's worked on a number of projects, from reward strategy to talent and mobility, policy reviews, and also multiple vendor reviews. So she's got great insight, and she's today advising our clients on many of the similar topics. So I'll hand over to Beverly now to make a start.
Thanks a lot, Jess, and really glad to be here, and good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world and listening today. So today's agenda is really to cover a step-by-step plan of how you in your organisation can measure the value of talent mobility and what's the value that mobility brings to your organisation. So we'll start off with an overview of what ROM is, return on mobility, and how that differs to ROI. We'll then progress to work on how you would build your own story within your organisation and what are the questions and the challenges you want to answer to your business and your stakeholders. The next is then to understand how you then put that into process and create an action plan, and what's the step-by-step approach. How do you plan out in terms of time and resources and data that you require to address your challenge and to create and prove that return on mobility? And finally, what are the next steps to put that action plan into place? So whenever we talk about any kind of business activity, usually in most businesses, any kind of business activity is actually measured by some kind of ROI. So whenever you take any kind of business activity into account, or you plan a new action or a project, it's extremely likely you'll need to first of all build a business case around that new action or that project. And of course, when the business is planning to move an employee, the majority of companies, and I don't know many that don't do this, will require some kind of cost analysis of what the costs are that are incurred and how that's going to be analysed in correspondence with the employee's salary, their position level, the potential revenue or cost-saving contribution they might make to the company by taking on an assignment, or the objectives that they might need to meet, and understand if those relocation costs that are applicable for the assignment are worth undertaking. And although most of the companies that I know evaluate the costs up front before moving, we know that still there are many companies out there that aren't able to actually track all of the actual costs versus budget, and on top of that, are not able to understand if the objectives of the relocation or the assignment have actually been met, or even if the investment has created some kind of tangible return to the business, whether that's financial or intangible. And there's reasons for this are multiple. So one of them is that there's many factors at play which are determining if an assignment or a relocation has been a success. And most organisations have different perspectives or different ways of determining success related to their organisation. They're not always relevant to the direct cost versus the budget comparison. And many are often related to other factors. For example, it could be performance levels, or it could be engagement levels, it could be promotion rates, business results, cost savings, or other things. And this kind of data is often not accessible to mobility functions, and that's where the challenge occurs of proving that worth and that return on mobility. And as we see that HRIS and assignment management systems and platforms are creating better functionality and better integration capabilities, and those capabilities are accelerating, so too does that possibility to analyse that sort of deeper context of success. But where there are those kinds of integration, in many cases there still aren't those kinds of integration, and many mobility functions are actually far from that kind of seamless integration. So we know that so many are still working off pure functional spreadsheets which aren't linked to data that's relevant to proving that success. Back in 2018, so last year, we also wanted to help mobility practitioners to address some of their biggest challenges through a series of interactive tools which we call Path Builder, which are established through a series of workshops to help mobility to move more easily to focus from the transactional to the strategic. Return on Mobility is the second in that series to help mobility to answer the questions that your business stakeholders have and what is the real value of mobility to your organisation. So talking about ROI and how does that differ to ROM? So when we talk about ROI, we're talking about return on investment. And investment, of course, by its very inference, talks about cost. But when you talk about cost, with regards to mobility, as we all know, there's so much more at stake. And it's not just about the overall cost, but it's actually about factors such as talent and retention, attrition, performance, meeting business objectives. And every company will have different perspectives on what's important. ROI just implies that focus is on cost, whereas ROM, return on mobility, goes much broader and talks about those other metrics and putting them into context of success and whether they're actually meeting and achieving the business goals. What's really critical to the business? It might not be that it's cost related. In some cases it is cost focused, but in others it could be around leadership pipeline or project success or employee engagement levels and so on. So who are your stakeholders? Understand what your stakeholders want to know and what they need to know. Is it all about cost, or is it other focuses? What are the stories that might create those data points? Understand, for example, certain questions that your stakeholders might want to know or need answers to. So it could be something as simple as understanding if undertaking a relocation enables better performance and faster promotion rates. Or another question that you might have might be that if a company pays for country residents past an assignment, does that actually improve assignee retention rates? A few examples from some of the clients that we're working with and how they've looked at return on mobility and what factors they've determined and assessed. One example is a Chinese electronics client who had a development program, and they wanted to know if they were selecting the right talent for the developmental assignments. The next was a European food manufacturer, and they wanted to understand if performance rating fluctuations on assignment would be if the European food manufacturer wanted to understand if performance rating fluctuations, which are natural during an assignment, and when they would occur. So they wanted to understand when they would occur and why they would occur, and what kind of support might be successful to help enable a faster ramp-up time and to improve that and to narrow the gap of performance whilst on assignment. And finally, a US tech company wanted to know if it was really worth spending money on long-term assignments or if permanent one-way transfers were still more cost-effective to the business. So using a story to define return on investment. So this is an example of how you could go about it step by step. So first of all, it's about the question. So in this scenario, the question is, does our global rotation program support the development of future leaders? The story that you might want to build around that question could be, the global rotation program does develop our future leaders. However, it is at greater cost than standard short-term assignments. So to go about answering that question and to prove that story is true, you first of all have to understand the actual goals of the program itself. So in this scenario, the goals of the program, the global rotation program, were that high potential leaders would go through a 4-stage rotation program over 2 years. Participants would see promotion through the program from their terminology of level 4 managers to level 6 directors. Short-term assignment benefits would kick in if they weren't in their home location for a particular assignment. And finally, any assignment-related costs should follow a fixed budget. The next step is then to understand the data that's required to answer the question, the story, and if those goals have been met. So in this scenario, the data that was needed would be to understand who are the participants of the program, what is the data set. You might want to think about the current participants. You might want to also think about past participants. You might want to look at some historic data to a reasonable level of time, so maybe a couple of years, depending on the length of that program. And then understanding what is the status of those participants before, during, and after the assignment. So what level are they at before, during, and after, and how long has it taken them to get from level 4 to level 6? What's the promotion rate and what's the average timings post-program? Are all promoted, or is it only some of them? What's the overall cost of the program rotations? Have there been any exceptions? And if there are, what type, what volume? Are there any trends? What's been budgeted and what was actually spent? Was it on target or not? So to understand what kind of stories might be important to define your return on mobility, you first will have to think about your stakeholders and think about the questions that they might have that you want to answer. Define a few of them that might be resonating to them and that are important to answer. So is it cost? Is it around performance? Is it around no noise? Is it around meeting a business objective? Or is it perhaps creating a leadership pipeline? And don't forget that different stakeholders will have very different objectives and often very different viewpoints depending on their own level, their function, perhaps their region even, or business group. And it's important to bear that in mind. If you're not sure about what's important or how to define that, that's another part of our Path Builder series and a separate workshop session. During that session, you can understand who your stakeholders are. It might be that you have more key stakeholders than you're first of all aware of. The next step is to understand what is important to them, what challenges they're presenting to you and what challenges they have. And then finally to understand the communication strategy and how to interact with them to build up the partnership and to get their buy-in. On this screen, we've got a few sample questions. So these are some of the questions that some of our clients are asking, and I'm sure that you listening on the line will probably resonate with some of them. Other examples we see are things like, is one region more expensive globally and why? Or do we improve business success when an assignee has been on an assignment? Or does a core flex policy improve assignee satisfaction and engagement? Or another example could be, were the policy improvements we made actually successful for the business? Okay, here are some sample metrics. So there's lots of different things here to be thinking about, and it won't be that all of them are relevant to your particular challenge or your particular question, but it might be that there are some within each of the segments. So what we do is segment those by cost or by talent, by quality and by volume, typically. So for example, it might be that you're looking at region, if you're looking at regional differences, regional expenses, comparing from one place to another. It could be that you're talking about the retention rates of your assignees, so you want to look at retention rates and the attrition rates. You might want to look at cancellation rates or assignment completion rates, or if it's talent related, what are the goals and are they met? What percentage of goals have been met? It could be around volumes by tier or by level or by policy. And finally, something else to think about might be around diversity and inclusion. So it could be, do the mobility diversity rates marry up to organisational diversity rates, for example. A really key component of carrying out a return on mobility exercise is to enlist the help of an executive sponsor. So an executive sponsor will be someone who helps you to champion your cause and your project throughout the organisation. They'll have the following responsibilities. So one is to champion that initiative and the benefits that it's going to bring to the organisation, whether that's the whole organisation or just specific groups. They'll help you to ensure that those goals that you're looking to achieve actually align with the overall HR and the company strategy. So looking at your questions, the stories you might want to depict, and actually telling you if they're going to match up with the expectations of the company and the needs of the strategy that the organisation has. That sponsor will also help you to reduce any obstacles that you might face along the way and get the support and the buy-in from other key leaders. So it could be that you're having problems with getting data. It could be that you're not getting the stakeholders you need to help answer your questions or give you the information you need. The type of person that you'd expect to have as your executive sponsor would be someone who's very supportive of the mobility programme, who thinks that and understands the importance of mobility. It's also someone who really understands the need and the importance of data and analytics and how that can define success. So understands and has some sort of input into the importance of data. And that person also has to have a positive reputation within the business. So someone that people look up to and respect and also trust. And you yourself, if you're going to enlist their support, you also will need to trust them. And finally, they're going to give you the time, they have that time available, and they're going to be a vocal supporter for your cause. And one of the key things we'd say about an executive sponsor is actually that they're not a mobility person, but they have some kind of interest in the mobility function. So it could be someone in reward, or it could be in talent, or it could be maybe even finance or into operations perhaps. Someone with lots of energy who's going to help you get things done. Someone that the business trusts and that you trust. And finally, that their analytics and data focused is vitally important. And with that, they'll help you to champion the cause and obtain the data that you need. So creating an action plan. So step by step, the first point is, as I said, to define your story or the stories that are important to you by answering some questions. So thinking about the questions that you want to answer and understanding how you're going to go about answering them. Knowing the stories you want to create, answering those questions, and the narrative that you want to sell into your stakeholders. Then it's to understand who could be your executive sponsor, who's going to be the champion of your cause. Where is the data that you need to answer your questions? Who owns that data, and is that data global or regional, for example? Are there any differences in formats if you're looking at regional-based data? Do you have all the data available to you? Do you have any data integrations? How often that data gets updated? So if you, for example, get some data at one point, is it going to be out of date within a couple of weeks? And how regularly do you need to review it? Who's going to support you in the project other than your executive sponsor? And can those stakeholders that you're interacting with actually confirm the questions you're trying to answer are actually important to the business? Then it's around creating a work plan, so understanding the tasks, the milestones, the deliverables. Understand and plan your timings and be realistic. So day-to-day work will often get in the way with lots of these kinds of projects. So it's about understanding what are the reasonable milestones And actually, is there something you want to work towards? Is it a leadership meeting? Is it a training in a group? Is it some other kind of project or deliverable? And can you meet that deadline by your project and getting in all of that data together at the right point? And then finally, what's your communication strategy? So what's the content of what you want to share at the end when you've got your results? Who's the audience for that communication? Is it only senior leadership? Is it all managers? Is it mobility function only? What's the communication strategy? And what's the frequency of that? And what's the medium? So is it something that's going to be communicated regularly, or is it a one-off? Is it going to be in a series of meetings or training sessions, for example? Are you going to target different groups in different ways because data and the answers you're trying to solve for might be different? So as I said, we hold Path Builder workshops regularly to establish ROM, or return on mobility, with various clients. And the slide you can see now is all about really the kind of format that we'll create at the end of that session. So step by step, looking at the stakeholders and who's relevant. So is it internal, is it external, is it leadership? Secondly is understanding those top questions that your mobility and your stakeholders are caring about, so relating to performance or cost or any risk factors, retention, quality, the role of mobility, talent, for example. Next is around the initiative, so actually determining what, from those top questions, the final question that you want to select to build your plan and understand the story. So what's the scope of that? What's the strategic value to the business? How are you going to measure it? Are you just looking at a particular business unit? Are you looking at a region? Start small and go from there. You need to start from a very smaller point of view to get the confidence to then build up and create more in-depth projects going forwards. And then defining those goals around the plan. So what are you trying to achieve? And what is the program or the question itself about? What's the focus, the objectives? So mobility's brand, strategic capability, talent development, value, and so on. And then finally, what's the data that you need to measure those goals, and where is that data? Who are the data owners? Is it around cost? Is it around quality? Is it around talent or performance or volume? And then finally, what is the final outcome? So what's the story you want to tell, and how are you going to share that with your stakeholders, and what's your communication strategy? So this is the format that we'll deliver at the end of a workshop that really puts that action plan into place, that then you can take away and build on over the next few months to then go back and deliver to your stakeholders. So what do we do next? Put this into reality. Understand and start thinking about what's important for you and your stakeholders, what questions you need to solve for. It might be in the next few weeks you're having conversations with some of your stakeholders, and something comes up and you think, that's one of the questions that we haven't really kind of got to grips with and we want to solve. Brainstorm those questions and then answer pick the one that you want to fix on. Then from there, create your story and your narrative. Understand what the narrative is that you're trying to build. Understand what's the data behind it and what data you need to get to create that narrative and prove the story and the theory that you might have. What's the source, who are the owners, and what's the accessibility? Then identify an executive sponsor who's going to support your project, who's going to champion the cause and make sure that you get the support you need to put it into practice. Then create your action plan with an approach, a timeline, and the resources you need to put it into practice, and bring it into life. Have a session with us, consult with us to have a workshop to put it into practice, and understand how other companies are going about it and how they're approaching that return on mobility. And that's the end of the slides.
Thank you for that, Beverly. Thanks for sharing those insights. And we have 5 minutes left now to take some questions. And I can see that some were posted throughout the presentation, so I'll make a start with those. But of course, feel free to submit any more that you have, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Okay, so the first question is, we have 3 different HRIS systems across our company that house our talent and HR data. How would we get this information from those systems to come together and use this for a project like this?
Yes, there's still many organisations globally that don't have one HRIS system across the organisation, and that can be one of the challenges with getting the data and having it all in one place. What I would say is, as I mentioned earlier on, start small and work from there, and you might want to start with, if those HRIS systems are regional or perhaps by business unit, you might want to select a portion of the organisation that you want to answer a question for first before going global or going across all of your mobility pool. So if you're looking at things like performance ratings or engagement levels, it might be that you kind of slice and dice the data according to that particular segment. And I think as most mobility or many mobility practitioners are probably having more conversations with talent people these days as well, it's building those partnerships. And once you start small and start answering some of the questions, from a small start, you might find that your talent colleagues are more ready and able to share more data with you to kind of bring it all together to a global purpose.
Thanks for that, Beverly. And seeing as you mentioned talent in your answer then, I'll jump to another question that we've had which references talent. So this question says, some of the things we want to measure, like rotation programs or expat success, are more about our talent group than mobility. Should we be measuring these?
Personally, I do think that there's a lot of interdependencies between the two, between talent and mobility, and it's true that there's still, sometimes some separation, but more and more mobility functions are linking in with talent partners to understand the potential for success and creating alignment. So growing focus, sharing information, helping talent to understand what is the potential risk factors or success factors, and then in turn understanding if mobility is bringing about promotion or engagement. So I think there is a lot more alignment, and it does come down to individual company culture. But personally, I think that they are interdependent and have a lot of relationship with one another. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, I think so, Beverly. And actually, on the subject of talent, we have another one. So how do we best integrate talent and mobility data for the long term? And then I think that's it for the questions in regards to talent for the time being.
So I think, it's around partnerships, and it's creating that kind of feeling of trust. And, when you have different functions, it's understanding each other's functions. So probably educating the talent group to people to educate mobility about what's important to them, and likewise mobility function to try and educate talent around some of the restraints or challenges that they might face with certain decisions that might be made. So for example, short notice notices of moves, or kind of not thinking about all of the scenarios or criteria for success, but educating upfront on what might be factors that could improve the chances of success, and working on those partnerships. So, I think it's good to have those elements of trust, the conversations, and kind of get the buy-in with each other, and understanding each other's challenges is kind of integral to that. And it's also about technology. So, as HRIS and mobility and assignment management systems are kind of developing, there's going to be more and more of a technology platform as well to support the sharing of data and the relevance of data. But it's about planning and future-proofing. So if you're going about setting up a new HRIS or an assignment management system, thinking and future-proofing the data that you need to capture, and what are the fields that might be mutually shared across platforms and systems? What are the business changes that are coming, and how you might want to kind of plan for those in that design stage. So I think they're all things that you can be doing to kind of future-proof and long-term strategize on sharing and working together.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm conscious of time, and unfortunately we didn't get a chance to get through all of the questions, but any of those that we didn't answer, Beverly will follow up directly afterwards. So I wanted to draw your attention to the dates on the screen. So the 14th and the 15th of May. This is when we're hosting our EMEA Summit, which will take place in Geneva. So please get in touch if you want some more information on this. And on behalf of the Grable team, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar, and hope that you found it useful and have got some good insight and tips so that you can take the next step in developing your return on mobility strategy. And just as a reminder, you'll be receiving a link to the recording and also to the presentation within the next few days. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to get in touch with Beverly or your Grable representative. So thank you again for joining, and I hope you have a good day.